Hi, everybody. This is our first day reading The Giver by Lois Lowry. As always, or I guess as recently, you either have the option to listen to this video or you can log into the Zoom call and listen to the live reading and discussion with the in-person students. Totally up to you and your preference. Either way, you do need to answer the reading question I posted just to make sure that you are following along and where you're supposed to be. So today we're going to read a little bit of chapter 1 and discuss some things. And if you have questions or concerns in the meantime, you can email me. I do also want to mention that you are in charge of taking your own notes and making sure that you write down whatever you think is important. All right, email, that's enough of that. So that you can use your notes on the test when it is time to do that. So just something to keep in mind. Usually when I pause to talk about things, it's things that are important. So do with that information what you will. All right, let's go ahead and get started. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had flown over the community twice. He had seen it both times, squinting towards the sky. He had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past and a second later heard the blast of a sound that followed. Then one more time a moment later from the opposite direction, the same plane. At first he had only been fascinated. He had never seen an aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes, the landing field across the river, the children rode their bicycles to the river bank and watched, intrigued, the unloading and then the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. It was not a squat, fat-bellied cargo plane, but a needle-nosed, single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adults as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused, for an explanation of the frightening event. Then all of the citizens had been ordered to go to the nearest building and stay there. Immediately, the rasping voice through the speakers, "Leave your bicycles where they are." Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his family's dwelling. He had ran indoors and stayed there, alone. His parents were both at work, and his little sister Lily was at the child care center. She was at the child care center where she spent her after-school hours. Looking through the front window, he had seen no people, none of the busy afternoon crew of street cleaners, landscape workers, and food delivery people who usually populated the community at that time of day. He saw only the abandoned bikes here and there on their sides. An upturned wheel on one was still revolving slowly. He had been frightened then. The sense of his own community silent. Waiting had made his stomach churn. He had trembled. But it had been nothing. Within minutes the speaker had crackled again, and the voice, reassuring now and less urgent, had explained that a pilot in training had misread his navigational instructions and made a wrong turn. Desperately, the pilot had been trying to make his way back before his error was noticed. Needless to say, he will be released, the voice said, followed by silence. There was an ironic tone to that final message, as if the speaker found it amusing. And Jonas had smiled a little, even though he knew what a grim statement it had been. For a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. Okay. So if you are anything like the in-person students, you're probably feeling a little confused right now. So let me break some things down for you. So first we're introduced to our character Jonas, okay? And he is feeling some kind of way about something that's happening in December, okay? And the word that he comes up with originally is the word frightened, which launches us into this flashback of a plane flying over his community. And the reason we launch into this flashback is not only because Jonas is trying to justify his emotions, but it's also to give us some information about the community itself, okay? So first and foremost, we get some dystopian elements, and I asked you what to remind yourselves what those were with the bell work today. So really we get three big ones as far as dystopian elements go within the first couple of paragraphs. And they include constant government surveillance. And we see that with the speaker announcing to the citizens right down here that they needed to drop their bikes and do whatever they were doing immediately and go to the nearest building, okay? So if they are announcing this information over the loudspeaker, right, so that everybody in the community can hear it, that would imply, obviously, that they are watching and know exactly what's happening, that they know that there is an aircraft that's not doing what it's supposed to, and that obviously the members of the community are feeling very confused and anxious about what's happening. And they're looking to the governing body for guidance, okay, whoever that governing body is. So that's where we see constant government surveillance. We also have blind consent from all citizens, right? It even says down here, instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike to its side and went into his family's dwelling, okay, into their house. So without question, every single member of the community that was outside and heard that announcement did exactly what they were told to do. That is blind consent, right? Following the rules without question. And then finally, the last dystopian element is distrust of the outside world. And we see that with the airplane itself, right? Jonas has said that he had never seen an aircraft so close before because it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. And the closest thing they'd even seen to an airplane before are the cargo planes that drop off supplies. And even those fly away from the community, right? Not directly over it. So this is more evidence of the idea that there's a distrust of the outside world. So we have those three dystopian elements that are starting to set up how the community functions, okay? So we know that it is very structured, it is very closely watched, and the people that live there do exactly what they're supposed to all of the time, okay? And if they don't, just like this pilot made the mistake, they're released. And Jonas talks about releasing in this paragraph here with the big bold words. Needless to say, he will be released. And we don't know exactly what that means just yet. It's a very vague description, but essentially he says, for a contributing citizen to be released from the community, meaning a person that isn't sick or elderly, to be released from the community. It's a big deal, right? He says it's a final decision, a terrible punishment, and an overwhelming statement of failure, okay? And the first two are pretty self-explanatory, right? If you mess up enough times in this community, there will be big consequences, and the biggest is being released. So it's the final decision and a terrible punishment. But as far as the third thing, an overwhelming statement of failure, that means that essentially it goes back to the idea of blind consent from all citizens. Everybody working together to make sure that stuff in the community gets done, okay? So if one person fails, it's a failure for everybody because everybody was supposed to make sure that that person did what they were supposed to. And that's where that part comes in. All right, let's go ahead and continue. Even the children were scolded if they used the term lightly at play, jeering at a teammate who missed a catch or a stumble in a race. Jonas had done it once, had shouted at his best friend, "That's it, Asher, you're released," when Asher's clumsy error had lost a match for his team. He had been taken aside for a brief and serious talk by the coach, had hung his head with guilt and embarrassment, and apologized to Asher after the game. Now thinking about the feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river path, he remembered that moment of palpable stomach-sinking terror when the aircraft had streaked above. It was not what he was feeling now, with December approaching. He searched for the right word to describe his own feeling. Jonas was careful about language, not like his friend Asher, who talked too fast and mixed things up, scrambling words and phrases until they were barely recognizable, and often very funny. Jonas grinned, remembering the morning that Asher had dashed into the classroom late as usual, arriving breathlessly in the middle of the chanting of the morning anthem. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained standing to make his public apology as was required. "I apologize for inconveniencing my learning community." Asher ran through the standard apology phrase rapidly, still catching his breath. The instructor in the class waited patiently for his explanation. The students had all been grinning because they had listened to Asher's explanation so many times before. I left home at the correct time, but when I was riding along near the hatchery, the crew was separating some salmon. I guess I just got distraught watching them. I apologized to my classmates, Asher concluded. He smoothed his rumpled tunic and sat down. We accept your apology, Asher, the class recited, the standard response in unison. Many of the students were biting their lips to keep from laughing. I accept your apology, Asher, the instructor said. He was smiling. And I thank you because once again you have provided an opportunity for a lesson in language. Distraught is too strong an adjective to describe salmon viewing. He turned and wrote distraught on the instructional board. Beside it, he wrote distracted. Jonas, nearing his home now, smiled at the recollection, thinking still as he wheeled his bike into its narrow port beside the door. He realized that frightened was the wrong word to describe his feelings. Now that December was almost here, it was too strong an adjective. Okay, so again, you're probably like, what does any of this have to do with anything? And again, it goes back to the structure of the community, okay? So I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, just because I want you to think about it. Is this community hippy-dippy, kind of fly by the seat of their pants, anything goes? They don't really care about the words you use, what actions you use, right? It's very lazy. If you said no, you're right, because they're not, okay? This community is precise and exact, and we know that because let's talk about first language, okay? So remember, the beginning of this book, what we're still focused on right now, is Jonas figuring out the perfect word to describe how he's feeling about what's coming in December. Okay, so we have the flashback of the aircraft because he was talking about him feeling frightened for the December ceremony. I kind of just gave something away, I'm sorry. For what's coming in December. But then he decides that frightened is too strong a word, and that's where we come in with Asher, okay, his best friend. So we know that having precise language is a very big deal in this community, okay? And any inconvenience or wrong use of a word is reprimanded, right? They have a recited apology that all students who are late have to give, right? Because they've inconvenienced their classmates and the instructor. Can you imagine if you guys had to do that type of thing? If you came in class late and had to make a public apology to everybody? Good Lord, you guys would be so, embarrassed, and you probably wouldn't even do it, to be honest with you. So that's how strict and structured the community is, okay? And we get into this idea of Asher kind of being the class clown, not intentionally, right? With using the wrong words. And the instructor makes a point to correct him and explains why it's important to correct him. Because it all centers around the idea that the community is precise and structured, and therefore the people need to be precise and have structure. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now Jonas has decided that being frightened is too strong a word to describe how he's feeling about December. So again, these flashbacks are just to give us some background information about the community so that we can kind of have some, inside knowledge about what the community is like. Let's go ahead and continue. He had waited a long time for this special December. Now that it was almost upon him, he wasn't frightened, but he was eager, he decided. He was eager for it to come, and he was excited, certainly. All of the 11s were excited about the event that would be coming so soon. But there was a little shudder of nervousness when he thought about it, about what might happen. Apprehensive, Jonas decided. That's what I am. Who wants to be first tonight for feelings? Jonas's father asked at the conclusion of the evening meal. It was one of the rituals, the evening telling of feelings. Sometimes Jonas and his sister Lily argued over who would get to go first. Their parents, of course, were part of the ritual. They too told their feelings each evening, but like all parents, all adults, they didn't fight and wheedle for their turn. Nor did Jonas tonight. His feelings were too complicated this evening. He wanted to share them, but he wasn't eager to begin the process of sifting through his own complicated emotions, even with the help that he knew his parents could give. You go, Lily, he said, seeing his sister, who was much younger, only a 7, wiggling with impatience in her chair. I felt very angry this afternoon, Lily announced. My childcare group was at the play area, and we had a visiting group of 7s, and they didn't obey the rules at all. One of them, a male, I don't know his name, kept going right to the front of the line for the slide, even though the rest of us were all waiting.